Hello once again, dear friends, another welcome to our session in the Forum Laws of Future 2.0. And now we'll be having another very interesting session, dialogue with scholars as part of the Science and Technology year. November is the month of the AI, and today we have collected the leading scholars and academia representatives in ethics and regulation of AI to look at the issue from different perspectives. I'd like to introduce the participants of the panel. PhD in legal science, Dean from the Far Eastern Federal University, Mr. Dremlyuga Roman. PhD in sociology, Head of Laboratory of Digital Transformation, Mr. Spirin Yevgeny, PhD in Philology, Head of the Center for Supporting, Preparing and Training the Heads of Digital Transformation from RENIPA, Madam Yekaterina Geomarovna Potapova, Head of Academic Center of Artificial Intelligence of MGIMO, Mr. Andrei Ignatiev, PhD in Economy, Dean of Economic Relations, Chair and Head of AI Center of MGIMO University, Anna Abramova, PhD in Law, Dean, Head of the Chair for Information Legislation and Digital Technology of the Legal Academy, Mr. Alexei Minbalev, Mr. Savelyev from HSC, Mr. Andrei Kuleshov, analyst from the Global IT Cooperation Center, Valery Fedorovich Karpov, PhD in Technical Science and Engineering, Head of Robotechnics Laboratory, and the Head of Russian Practice in IP, IT and Telecom, Co-Head of European Practices in Regulating the Internet and Technology, Dantes, Senior Research Fellow from Russian Academy of Science, Mr. Naumov Viktor Borisovich, and Grigory Marshalko, representing the Cryptography and Encryption Academy. I'm so pleased to welcome all of you, and we have a lot of interesting panelists and we are pressed for time, so we'll have two formats of interaction. First, I'll ask a question, a targeted question, and give you 3 to 3.5 minutes to respond. I'll keep track of your timing. Later, we will ask several general questions which will entail a live debate, and our viewers like it so much. It is very interesting, they say. So off we go, and the first question would be to Andrei Ignatiev, who has been one of the co-authors of the AI Ethics Code that was enacted on the 26th of October, and Andrei is also a very well-known person. He worked on the TC 164, and he was a co-author of an analytical report titled Ethics and the Digital. So how do you think whether the soft law instruments are quite relevant in regulating the AI, and what are the most important overarching principles? A very good day. Let's start with the principles. If we mention them, they're value-based, and the human values is a very flexible notion that has been subject to change over time of this civilizational development. And I have found a quote of academician Kapitsa: "In foreseeable future will switch to a new development paradigm for the humankind, and we will have a major shift of life and human values, and knowledge will dominate," he said. So the values is a plastic notion, and there may be different perspectives on that. If we speak about the most important of them, we might quote the documents that were enacted up to now. The activity peaked in 2018, and now the legal framework is virtually complete. And last year there was a study by a Swiss lab team that analyzed 116 instruments and singled out the most frequent principles that include transparency, 101 mentioned in 116 documents, justice, fairness, responsibility, do no harm, and privacy. These are the principles. You can delve into each of them, but we don't have time. So, anyway, I want to highlight the transparency principle, as it may be rendered differently. You may speak about the transparency of algorithms and computing methods, but it gives rise to a dilemma, as the greater the transparency, the less AI content. Speaking about privacy, I must say that now we'll have new technological solutions coming to the fore, like differentiated confidentiality, the multilateral safe computing, and human amorphous encryption and others. And the Turing Institute conducted a similar research, and they have the first acronym principle: fairness, accountability, sustainability, and transparency. So probably around these principles most of the instruments revolve. There was another question, and part of the question on the soft law, meaning it may be useful, even despite the fact that it is mandatory or binding, as these instruments may point to the social good, and definitely they're used for the lawmaking, and they impact the decision makers, and the soft law isn't incentivizing further studies and research. It is an instigator for the academic and scientific community in a nutshell. Andrew, thank you very much for being accurate with the time limit, and thank you for a very concise elaboration on the topic. And let me ask another question to Mr. Andrei Kulishov, that also participated in the National Ethics Code elaboration. And you are a participant of a number of international multilateral bodies on UNESCO platform and the Council of Europe, and you have been working hard there. So I want to ask what impact may Russia's acceding to the global UNESCO recommendations have? And what is the possibility of coming up with uniform international rules on AI ethics for major entities and for international organizations and on their platforms? Thank you, the organizers, for a valuable discussion today. In the morning we have had a call on UNESCO recommendations, and my personal opinion is that probably it needs refining and tweaking and reconfiguring, I believe. There is the knight's honor, and there is the honesty of an accountant, and in that document they start with the knight's honor and then move towards the accountant's honesty. So what do you want from the developers? Do you want the knight's brilliant honor or good accountability? We're not yet in the know. So going into detail, I must say that UNESCO is an entity for education, science and culture, and the document contains a phrase that the recommendation should go beyond the UNESCO mandate, but my personal opinion is that it goes far beyond currently. It might be useful as an infrastructure element, but currently it is not good enough to play this function, so it is an empty shot. With respect to the AI, what matters is scalability on the society, with respect to the society, and uncontrolled effect on the humanity and society. Francis Howden, an ex-employee of Facebook, gave explanation about the algorithms and accused Facebook that the algorithms priority setting gives rise to interethnic tensions because it maximizes time, online time. And she said that Facebook contributed to the tensions in Ethiopia, and that cannot be considered as ethical, although it was legal, and the society will sooner or later avenge. The retribution will come. So what we need is to have the relevant legal framework in place. And then comes the values. The values are in line with the UNESCO mandate, well-being of individuals, society, and humanity. As per the UNESCO mandate, the current UNESCO representation of guidelines speaks about the well-being of society and makes a separate mention about the inclusiveness and the environmental protection. But is it not part of the well-being of the humanity? It is, but why mention it for another time, once more separately? So there's a great deal of incongruities that provide grounds for hesitation and different interpretations, and that will not be a piece of infrastructure for our developers to know where the prohibited territory lies. Thank you, Andrei. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to connect to the UNESCO phone call, but it is hard to disagree that today they go far beyond their mandate, and tweaking that document, fine-tuning of that would be desirable, but the ethics of AI is something that all international bodies are now looking into, and in this respect I'd like to ask Anna Abramova, that also co-authored the ethics code, and also she's quite active with respect to international cooperation. And I'd like to ask you whether it is feasible to come up with a uniform AI regulation system for all the global market stakeholders, and whether you see and consider it possible to develop bilateral instruments between states on that matter. Thank you for the invitation. If we speak about the international cooperation, I must say that today, to discuss the UNESCO recommendations, we have seen a divergence of positions, and at the final stage, when it is hard to make any adjustments, we should join in to stay within these discussions, be part of the process. As regards the codification, it is one of the universal tools that you can turn to different directions, and you can talk that at the supranational integration groups like EAU, and bilaterally But, you know, most feasibly, it's going to be like the supranational integration groups. Like, we have very good approaches there on how to regulate the AI from the perspective of the soft law. Thank you, Anna. I want now to address Mr. Naumov, Viktor Naumov. It is obvious that the deployment of the AI may be very useful for a national economy and has many other benefits, but you, being one of the leading lawyers in that sphere, have been studying those risks from 2015 or 16. And those risks may be related to new threats emergence. What are the gaps and blank spots in the regulation that you could name, and whether any legal action should be taken, additional legal action should be taken, or should we stay within the ethics domain? Thank you, Andrei. Good day, colleagues. I'm grateful to you so that you allow me to participate in this discussion. Sber has organized a very good event once again, and a very good makeup of panelists. Thank you. Now we are talking about the adjacent but different sets of regulation, ethics and the law. My personal opinion is it may be too critical, but it means that, you know, I want to emphasize that in Russian jurisdiction, ethics doesn't play a major part. We are not guided by the ethical values. While building our behavioral practices, while the rule of law is quite considerable, and the current law at the juncture of the digital transformation is not prepared for the critical changes that we're now going through. What are the main challenges of today? Once we look at the AI technology and robotics, there are several challenges. Number one, we may not have the capability to determine the real will of an individual, of a person, physical or legal, and the after effects and the repercussions. And the legal system hasn't been meant to define the will when someone pushed the red button, and the smart machine that had been learned before enacted or enabled a disaster, a catastrophe. And, you know, with this absence of a capability to determine the will, we may not think of the free will, like kinda the AI is managed by someone, and in the future, as the powerful AI may emerge in future, it may be capable of guiding others. So we should be clear what is called the AI and what is not. We should define the make-up of the persons that will have the legal identity, and the limit of liability of all those persons must be also set. When we elaborate and improve the system, legal system, we'll have the law enforcement, the proper law enforcement system, and we need that to safeguard both the users and developers. Thank you very much for being within the timeline and for your concise the statement, and I would like to turn now to Mr. Valery Karpov. Valery, you are an author of multiple works and papers dedicated to AI, ethics, and robotics, and I listened to your interventions on many occasions. You talked about these matters, and I was pleased to listen to that. And you represent the Russian AI Association that was set up in 1989 back then. So it's my pleasure to welcome you here, and I want to learn from you what ethical or legal obstacles or challenges emerge to assess the AI, and what is your take on the current developments in the AI here and worldwide, and on ethics too. Hello, colleagues. Well, with respect to the legal aspects and the application of the AI, well, I liked the topic, and I don't see any legal obstacles or difficulties. I don't think we should change any legislation. The underlying assumption of this question is, of different nature. Deliberately or because of an incompetence, currently we are seeing that a general picture is shaped, and the AI is seen as a silver bullet, is considered as a silver bullet that will provide a very good outcome, and we'll be able to resolve all our problems with its help. And this is why I'm exaggerating, yes, but we are taught to think that the main domain of the AI is the big data processing and neural networks, and nothing is required, nothing special is required for that. A server and a computer for the developer, it's cheap and easy, and the rest, what has been happening, it's like supporting the AI problems, like the broad public discussions with deliberate or indeliberate muddling of notions. And the AI technologies and digital technologies are equalized. These are different things and not tantamount to one another. And the ethics questions also are discussed. Discussions are rife, and we are moving and tilting towards discussing risks and threats and dangers, inherent dangers, and definitely that is all perceived quite well and swallowed by laymen. But we need to talk about different things that we have been lagging behind, and we trail the West, and we use their technologies and solutions, and the AI is quite expensive, with a lot of hardware and sensors and robots and others, and the main line of AI development today is resolving the behavioral problems, creating the systems that could interact with the outer world, outer environment, which is hardware. And our backwardness in terms of hardware and sensors and electronics, at the end of the day we have a huge gap in professionals training. This is something we should talk about, and we shouldn't talk about the law and discuss the possible dangers and hazards and after effects.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Valery. Here I absolutely agree with you in the statement that we mix up things. Not only in Russia, they mix up ethics and rights and laws. And in the West, robo-ethics, there's a notion which has been existing for a while, and it's been connected with legal rights. This is a phenomenon for all the lawyers now, because from the childhood we probably know very good split between ethics, morale, and the law between different regulators. Today, in today's discussion, we are circling around the same problems, I think, and the attempt to draw this line is the goal of this discussion, which will now end on that. And in this regard, I'd like to turn to Yevgeny Styrin. You are the author of the book, applicable problems of implementing ethics and artificial intelligence in Russia. Probably you know this book, dear colleagues. And following the suit of this work and this paper, and in the context of the ethics code of AI recently adopted, I'd like to discuss with you the measures which can be taken by developers or by the states or by the community to bring more clarity, more delineation in the issues of ethics and law, and how to do it to make it more trust, to get more trust from the population to those things. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Andrei, thanks for this invitation, for this wonderful discussion, very interesting and exciting one. I will do my best to comment on that. I just wanted to mention in the beginning that I'm a little bit deformed in terms of studying state governments, public administration for many years. And the book you mentioned, it was written rather from the position of a statesman. And I'd like to fix it from the beginning. Today, I am heading an international laboratory in the area of artificial intelligence. We just are beginning the series of expert interviews and research work with experts, with officials, public officials who are more or less involved in AI issues. And probably we can also resort to the comments of dear colleagues participating in this discussion today. The Code of Ethics and of artificial intelligence for Russia as additional measures, I'd like to recommend, of course, the extension of this domain. We should expand it for wider audience. We should popularize it, because this is first and foremost what these are the efforts of experts, efforts of major IT companies, developers, and the society in the broader sense, who are potential users of those products. They do not know much about it. And we'd like to recommend here to communicate it with the audience, to bring more knowledge to the audience. What is ethical use of AI? What is the use of AI not to harm others? It's necessary to demonstrate, to show how those algorithms operate, demonstrate their transparent decision-making process. Again, I'd like to mention system expertise of machine learning algorithms in order to detect some visible, like colleague already mentioned, Facebook and other solutions where there is discrimination in different properties against several users. Next thing is further industrial regulation. This code should develop in different areas, in different industries. Additional documents can be adopted and enacted. How to regulating to implementation of these provisions in different industries with their own specifics. At the first stage, it is very important to have the human role who will verify decisions taken based on AI systems in order to smoothly delineate responsibilities between human and machine. And one more thing, just in the end, the state should restructure the work of industries because AI is actively squeezing out standard workforce, and we should think about it too. Thank you. No sound, sorry. No microphone. Sorry, dear colleagues, small technical issue. I wanted to discuss this discussion with Ekaterina Potapova. Ekaterina, we have here a number of points which have to be discussed. You were a co-author of a big paper, Ethics and Digit, version number 1, version number 2. It's a great job. The great job was done, and many participants of this discussion took part of this work. You are representing the Digital Transformation RANIPA Center. So you are dealing with the training of those specialists who should implement artificial intelligence technologies on a professional basis. My question to you, what is your standpoint on the role of ethics in the training of our public administrator? What are political risks in terms of use of AI in the area of public administration in particular? Andrei, thank you very much for this kind invitation to take part in this brilliant discussion on the platform with wonderful experts. Thanks for your question. I do see here a big set of problems from versatile areas. If we take modern systems of AI which are existent already and are in use, I have to say that the existing risks in the public sector are not so different from already well-known risks of those systems in general. The problem sits in a different domain. It is the use and scale of the use of them, which seems to be inevitable for me. If we say that some system of social aid is being automated, and apart from some conventional automation, special algorithms are used, it means that this system, the reliable and fair operation of this system, would directly impact the not only users, so business users, but basically the whole state would depend on that. Big categories of people, hundreds, millions of people. Let's be absolutely fair here. And those risks which have been mentioned and will be mentioned, and the bias of AI, some errors, incorrect operation, the scale of this problem becomes huge at once. And another risk pops up, which is also discussed, is the responsibility. The fact that the responsibility in many ways could be fuzzy when we use systems, and who's responsible for this hello quality? Should it be the developer or the client, state organization or institution, or is it about specific operators of the system? This all brings up a huge risk when a specific person, individual or user, is individually dealing with this system, or there is a risk that the person won't be able to come to the truth, and the decision which is unlawful couldn't be revoked. Unfortunately, these cases are ubiquitous in Europe, in state. In our case, it's less because those systems are not so common in our case, but the risks are still there. And due to this fact, it's very important what you mentioned. We should be dealing with the enlightenment and training of people and education of people, and we should continue research activities and scientific activities. What Valery mentioned before me, the more in the work be invested in these systems, the higher their reliability extent and the less risks we would face. Thank you very much, Ekaterina. Now, I'd like to turn to Alexander Savelyev. I think Alexander is one of the most well-known lawyers dealing with the legal aspects of artificial intelligence technologies and internet technologies. You are famous for your theoretical and practical articles on data processing, and many lawyers know about your works and papers and research. I'd like to listen to your opinion as a lawyer on regulatory and ethical aspects of algorithm development. Is it possible to provide objectiveness and non-discrimination of artificial intelligence to protect intellectual property rights? And probably you know that personal data use is a very painful story for the development of AI systems. That would be really interesting to listen to your comment. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Thank you, Andrei, for your invitation to take part in this conference to share the views on this uneasy topic. The problem of algorithms is one of the key problems related to the further development of AI, because those who own algorithms will, in the nearest future, own the whole world. And algorithm developers have a huge responsibility and huge power, because many legally relevant decisions be made not by human but by algorithms, and decisions to employ, to provide credits, to disperse loans, and also making responsible for some acts and actions. And the fact is, what kind of criteria and facts are laid as a basis to these criteria and what weight they have is of a paramount importance. And the key remedy to this is, of course, transparency. And Andrei Ignatieff already mentioned it as one of the key principles in this area. The big challenge here is to determine what should be the scope of this transparency and how should it be fine-tuned and set up. We already touched upon some regulators, and in particular the ethics issues, and I would agree with the skeptical approach of Victor. Ethics is not only untypical for our country, but in general it is not typical for commercial companies. Their main goal is to make profit. There's a very very well-known principles. Provide 10%, they break 5%, they can break their head, and if they have 100%, they will dump all human laws. Ethics is a good stage, but should be a law too. The question is, how can we do this regulation adequate? In the Higher School of Economics, we made the research and we involved best practice, and we understood that it's better to start with state-owned structures. The governmental structures are of an incredible importance, and let the state test it on their system, let them test those algorithms for decision-making on their systems and show us the transparency, and then it can be deployed and roll out for the commercial sector, and not the other way around. They should not pilot it on commercial institutions. In this case, the state will gain more trust, and it will improve trust to the systems of AI. And that regulations which will be provided to provide higher transparency of state-owned systems, this regulation can be a basis for a more generic approach. Thanks, Alexander. It is a very widespread point of view. Although, as you know, I represent not only the Russian Academy of Science, but also Sberbank. We are on the forum of Sberbank, and we are very sober about the fact that there are spheres where public regulation, state regulation is absolutely necessary, and we are ready to help to build it up there. And sometimes the interests should be protected not only from the ethical but from the legal point of view. Ethics is perceived in sometimes in not traditional point of view. I'd like to continue this legal aspect discussion. I'd like to turn to Alexei Minbaleev, Alexei, you're not only the author of a number of publications about artificial intelligence in particular. I have to mention that the Department of the Information Right and Digital Technologies of the university, legal university, is actively taking part in the expertise and training experts. There are not so many experts in this area. This is a very important job, and we take young specialists to us, to our company, and try to work with them. In this regard, I'd like to discuss with you the trends in the area of AI regulation in the world, and what should we do to make more experts in the area of these technologies. Thank you very much, Andrei, for this wonderful conference organized by the bank. In terms of the regulation trends in AI's domain, first and foremost, today we experience the attempts to find a compromise, to find an optimal model of combination between different regulators in AI sphere. All states try and find a universal mechanism which would ensure efficient operation of technical regulation, ethical regulations, and legal norms. And if we take a look at the recent documents, we can find the whole wave of regulation of ethical side, but at the same time, practically it happens in the same time with the development of technical standards and development of the legislation. This is a very important trend, you know. This is a comprehensive regulation which we now encounter. And the legislators, they try to find an optimal way. I believe that the Russian Federation is taking the same similar way, and in the future we will need to understand what mechanisms are better to use. We should strictly delineate the area of technical regulation, legal regulation, and ethical regulation sphere. And we should set the record straight. From the methodological and theoretical point of view, it is very good to discuss it and to set up the main vectors and directions. All over the world, we actively see the changes of strategic documents, and it is clearly seen because the paradigm is changing slightly and gradually in terms of what to regulate and how to regulate the new areas. Another interesting area to be pointed out is expansion of areas of public relations where technologies of AI are used and attempts to regulate them. As for the modern problems which we are facing, it is not occasionally we discussed educational issues and master's problem. The really big challenge is lack of talents, because in the legal sphere in Moscow, we can find some concentration of specialists in digital technology sphere. If you move a little bit away from Moscow, in regions, we face a strong problem with that. Regional educational institutions have a very weak curriculums on that, so we need to expand significantly the work related with the training and education based on digital platforms, using online, creating and establishing a big block of different educational courses. We have a big block in our institution on digital law. We will develop it, and probably we will provide a free of charge education for other students. Of course, this area is very important. Also, it's very important to stimulate, to encourage development of technologies, both in the state sector and in business, in different areas of public relations. We shouldn't think that the priority is only state segment or only business is the priority. We have to provide comprehensive development in this area, because we can very quickly be lagging behind, and somehow we already lagging behind in the regulation of AI in the world. So the state should focus its attention on versatile support of technological development, and regulation should be done in this domain too. Thanks, Alexei. Thank you. I wanted to continue the educational topic, and I'd like to turn to Roman. Roman Dremluga, a question to you. it was very interesting for me to learn about the work which is done in the Far Eastern University, in particular in legal aspects of AI, and it was really surprisingly to learn. I know that you were heading a whole task force on a special grant for a big foreign player on ethics and AI. And I'd like to ask you to comment on your vision of AI development and AI ethics development. In the Far Eastern University, you have specific relations with Asian countries, with Asian universities. And please comment on the second issue, going back to practice, the ethical and legal character and the issues of content generated by AI. Probably we will come back to this issue later. Thank you very much. I'd like to combine both questions. I'd like to demonstrate in my response to your second question, what's the difference between the Western and Eastern approach to regulate artificial intelligence on the problem of generating content. You understand that AI-generated content is very cheap, very often it's realistic and cannot be told from the real one. It is really interesting, customized for the user, and now practically uncontrollably spread. On some negative evaluations, now the most part what we see, hear and read in the internet is being generated by the AI. And naturally, at some point, it should be stopped because there are some negative cases. For example, crimes are committed, cases are being created when using the voice of the general director, the whole company was cheated, and $300 million in Vietcong was the case when the bank was robbed using these new technologies. So apart from these criminal cases, we should understand that the information community, we are all rely on information. And in this case, I believe that every consumer of the information should understand whether he works with fake or with the real information. And such initiatives are present not only in the legal sphere. For example, in China, 1 year ago, there was a ban set on publishing deepfake, whether video or audio generated by AI, without mentioning that this is a deepfake. Moreover, they set very strict requirements on providers, on platform administrators. They have to filter it, and they could be criminally punished for that if there will be violations. If we speak about US, in the US they have absolutely different approach if we compare it. Since they believe that someone is intervening in their elections from the external, the first laws they adopted in California, in Texas and Maryland, they were related to the deepfakes with election candidates. And now this is the main direction of the development as regards generated information. There are also areas related to the intimate content when some external signs of a real personality are used. And we see really different approaches, different models, starting from controlling and restricting everything up to some freedom and handling only the main pain points. And we are in our university try to study these differences. We try to compare Asian approach and Western approach. Thanks a lot, Roman. I like to express my gratitude that you found a way to participate despite the very late hour in your city. We are finishing the first round. If you're ready to stay with us a little bit longer, please. If not, so we will excuse you, of course. I'd like to turn to Grigory Marshalko, finalizing our first round of discussion. Grigory was already speaking at this conference in one of the opening sessions with the presentation how to provide trust to AI. Could you tell us in general about the role of standardization to regulate artificial intelligence, and how can we provide this intelligence in a format of very short excerpts for those who were not able to listen to your lecture in the morning? Thank you very much, Andrei, for this invitation. Today I presented a number of results from our cryptography academia on this topic, and the role of standardization in AI is the same as for any other information technology. Because, yes, we agree that from the ethical point of view, we can set the directions where to go and how to develop further on the regulation. We can adopt general laws related to the application and the responsibility for the AI. But the standardization gives us methodology. And as any information system, we should give to the developers some toolkit to work with, to build systems. We should give the AI system to experts, independent experts who will audit and verify their quality. We should give them the toolkit to conduct this audit and verification. And in case of any unexpected situation, we should give the forensic experts the toolkit to make their investigation and to find who is to blame, whether it's a developer or operator who went beyond the application grounds. This is the toolkit which further on should make the basis for the regulatory framework of these systems. A big job is done in terms of quality assessment of these systems. In a number of cases, it is quite fragmented. But generally speaking, as for any other technology, we can apply the accumulated experience, accumulated bulk of toolkits and experience of building up complicated systems, complex systems, by making some changes. These changes are related to the following issues. The issue is that in AI system, we, along with the decision, we build up the algorithm, which will make a serious problem. How can we verify it? How can we audit it? We do have those approaches. They are not very easy, but they are doable. Because in the recent few years, the mathematical system which appeared is able to solve complicated problems and build the basis which can be a foundation for methods to implement legal regulations which will be built on that in future. Thank you. Thank you. It was very interesting. And now I'd like to move to the round of general questions. We will ask questions to everybody, and if you have a desire, you can comment. And I'd like to start with the following question. We took different angles, different views on ethical issues, AI regulation, and we do see that there are different risks of AI system implementations. And the most important thing I do see that we have a very versatile and very versatile discussion. We are representing different institutions, different professions. Not only lawyers are here with us today, which is very good. And for me, personally, it would be really exciting to ask you to speak out on the top topics in terms of ethics related to artificial intelligence, which need to be solved quickly within the nearest year or two. Please express your opinion. What problems are the most critical, the most urgent, requiring instant solution, if we can speak about instant solutions in terms of regulatory acts? Please express your opinion. Who wants to start, please?
If you allow, I'll say a few words. The main issue currently, the most dangerous thing, is like formalizing the moral norms. norms, like making them available for algorithm setting. Now we're trying to relegate to the AI system as many functions as possible, including the autonomous decision-making, which is crucial for the humanity. And the only way to enhance confidence with the system is to render it a legal identity. And for that, we need to formalize the rules and norms of morality, and then the risks begin. Thank you. So, on the one hand, we should be heading towards formalizing the moral and ethical requirements, but on the other hand, that may cause contentious outcomes. Yes, it is quite a slippery path, and the problems will start as soon as we engage and undertake that. But we can't do without that, so it is a very interesting problem setting. Who else? May I? Yes, Alexei. I still believe that formalizing is very important and we need that. But what is also significant is to be able to determine the liability for the violation of ethical norms. Not only that, we should elaborate ethical norms, but we should see to their compliance. We need the mechanisms of control and oversight. I think it also is an important thing to bear in mind. Alexei, if I turn the ball a bit, what is the ethical responsibility? How can it manifest itself? Well, we consider that in broad sense. It is about responding to breaches of ethical norms from some stakeholders in the process of development and deployment of the AI. It is it should be a public mechanism, societal mechanism, like putting someone on the roster of malign users, or breaches, or prohibition of participation in tenders and contracts. So this is a mechanism that can be designed by an ethics regulator, and definitely that should face condemnation, and the lawmakers in their turn should determine some prohibitions in future because such offenders are existent. Okay, because I asked this question not by chance. I can see a number of hands raised, but I suggest we should use a rule that is supported in the West, like ladies first. Anna Abramova, over to you. Thank you. I would support Victor in saying that in our society the talk about ethics would not always meet a good understanding, and comparing Russian and international students, I must say that they are more receptive to such discussions as they see its value, inherent value for the society and for the business environment that they are entering. And judging by what we do at our department on AI, I must say that we should popularize the AI. But on the other hand, we should improve education and training in this respect. And the recent initiative of the Higher Education Ministry was about launching a baseline course on the AI. Probably that will be implemented in the future. But what we should do is to have this cross-cutting educational paradigm comprising business, academia, and researchers. And Andrei probably asked his question, meaning the short run. But you know, it is also typical and necessary in the long run. It is a very acute and burning issue for us. Victor. Thank you, Andrew. I will dwell upon a set of questions and problems related to the identifying and detecting and the identity of the notions that we are discussing. The paramount problem for the use of all possible technologies is kind of creating a system of determinations and definitions in ethics and adjacent law with respect to AI, robotics, and automation. We can seem quite professional. Thanks to the moderation of Andrew, thank you very much for selecting such a good makeup. And we could puff out our chests and speak about sleek, beautiful things, but each of us has a different idea of the AI notion. What we need is a cross-cutting discussion and a quick development of a glossary of terms for law and everyday routine activities and statehood. Once again, ladies first, Ekaterina Potapova. Colleagues, I want to approach this issue from a different angle. I'm haunted by an idea that apart from step number 1, we need step 0 that will be related to a broad range of technologies of digital nature. And here the data leaks problem is existent, and it has become a real scourge, and that currently busts confidence for AI and technology. If we speak about narrow applications of AI, like the image recognition and video surveillance and control and other things, like the loss of that data is fraught with huge risks for that solution. So if we speak about the 1-year horizon, it is important to make steps, regulatory and lawmaking steps. It is a fire, and it's time to extinguish that fire. Thank you. It is quite a frequent premise, and Alexander Savelyev probably would also like to comment on that. Yes, indeed, Ekaterina took that from the tip of my tongue as a key feature about the AI development would lie with confidence, and now many people just withhold their data, don't sign in or don't go to public resources and portals, because they see that there has been a lot of leaks and no one was made accountable, and they even ain't heard any apologies, and that will be an issue, because data underlies the AI development and technological solutions development, and for that sake, to see the advancement in these domains, we need to provide an enabling context for data computing and processing, like anonymizing. And we should provide protection from the leaks. So this government, the state, should be capable of walloping itself for major leaks, chastising itself, showing that there are clear rules of the game. It's not only about commercial operators. Everybody should be brought to account. Unless this is done, other things will be stalled, because people will try to hold off their data. They would shun AI initiatives and algorithms. Thank you, Alexander. Grigory, over to you. Yes, Andrew. A lot of good word has been pronounced, but I must say that this code of ethics and the standards that are in the pipeline should be reported and submitted to the developers. Currently, we don't have the automatic self-teaching for the AI. It is kind of the flesh of the flesh and the blood of data scientists and developers who clear the data and with whom the data originate. Arvind Paraman from Princeton has said that this giant, the 4 billion AI on the internet, is built upon having data that we irresponsibly process. And we may derive data from whatever, and it's going to collapse sooner or later. And these people are responsible for the selection of algorithms and metrics, and they are to start implementing this code of ethics, so we should be prompt in providing the guidance so that they can take as instructions. Thank you, Grigory. Roman, what is your take? Well, being a scholar, I should look at the social demands. It is not probably a reliable, credible sampling, but you know, I have a legal course with students, both online and offline. Each semester, I survey them, and the main risk they see is to be unemployed. And in the course of the semester, they keep asking one and the same thing. And we meet on several occasions with them, and it is the main concern of theirs, and all other risks. Another risks that they mention is that the human being is belittled, and we may lose the human-centric paradigm when, like in the 20th century, we received the right to choose. And I think that the main concerns and misgivings of the society in this domain, I, as a scholar, see in our mission to help answer these questions. Thank you, Roman. Andrew Kuleshov, your view. Thank you. I will be supportive of what has just been said by Grigory. With respect to currently, we should make the developers aware that they need the code in the first instance, so that they should be aware of the responsibility and liability with respect to data protection and algorithm implementation. And lack of understanding would result in decisions that will further be rendered non-ethical, or people will stay clear of decision-making. And, you know, this code of ethics by the developers, the buy-in of that code among them is necessary, I think. Andrei Ignatiev. Over to you. Thank you, but it was most about the ethics, not the AI. So trying to take stock of the discussion, I must say that, well, ethics has a bearing on many other spheres, but, you know, still we should structure and become more specific, and the complex matrix of links, well, could help us map the links with the human rights, with trust and confidence, with risks and the privacy protection, data protection and technical issues of dislodging, displacement, detection. So after all these leak words, we should become more specific, and that can be sorted out with the help of technical standards and the uniform terminology. Currently, we have a standard on confidence, which may be the benchmark, and next year ISO will present the bias standard. And the ethics standard will be ready next year, so we need more clarity in terms, and we need kind of sections of terms, and I have my own idea of that, but I'll not elaborate now. Anyway, structuring and kind of specializing is a must-have. So ethics by domain is the slogan of today. Thank you, Eugen. Colleagues are speaking later than the rest. I would kind of like to recap what has been said by Alexander and Grigory. On the one hand, I would support the idea that the state currently is vested with the responsibility for deploying the AI solutions properly. And as I see it, there is a risk of lack of understanding, and if the government starts with itself and presents a set of properly operating algorithms in agriculture, healthcare and education, will be able to see once these algorithms are self-learning. We will see the final performance and the outcome. And my second thought is that the government is getting more and more data about us. And here I see a risk that the government may be tempted to recommend the individuals, the people, to prompt their choices in education and career and their health status. And but you know, one should be very careful about that. You know, you should be careful in interacting with citizens on all these matters. Thank you. Colleagues, it's not accidental that I have tried to have this snapshot. And it is important that the code of ethics will give rise to a number of issues that will need resolution in near future. And from this perspective, your opinion is very important, and I have heard a number of interesting stances, but now I would move to a new side, to a new topic, to a new territory. All of you are celebrities. You are conspicuous on the media, and probably you faced the question about the rights of the AI quite often. Like, people may ask when the AI will have the same rights as us. For general public, it is a matter of interest, and they kind of find it interesting because they read Isaac Asimov, I mean the older generation, and the Wild West world, which is kind of a benchmark for the current generation. So the question whether the AI will receive the legal identity at the end of the day is one of the most frequent questions. I saw on many occasions that in the professional community discussing possible rights for the AI was a bad tone, a bad style, and then discussions began, and after a while, once again, they were dropped. But, you know, I actually wonder, though it's quite a theoretic matter, but still how you believe. What is your view? Whether some of the prospects for the AI, for the powerful AI, are existent or not, whether it has any future. We all know the position of the government, and many of you work on a committee on ethics and AI of UNESCO, and definitely the legal identity is not considered the urgent matter by our government, and I want to talk about a theoretic thing. And prior to this panel, we had interesting debates on that, and as a follow-up on them, if you want, can you speak about these rights and this possibility, or it should not be discussed altogether? Just raise a hand. Roman, you're holding a hand. Well, why not? If a river in New Zealand or Amazonia is considered a legal entity, you know, we need to understand what for. In the ecological law, it is clear. We're eliminating intermediaries. So why that should be done? Well, my response is why not? And do you have an answer to the question why? Well, with respect to that, probably we may have efficient investors and economic actors. Why not? Sooner or later, a legal entity was considered something revolutionary, and lawyers would point at you with a finger, saying you're crazy, but now, you know, in environmental law, a revolution happened. So if it is conducive economically to the deployment of the AI solutions and clear, transparent use of that, why not? Grigory, as of today, I would respond no. Why? Because this is a difficult system. But this is the flesh of the developers. But, you know, we should look at what is the conceptual difference between the human being and the AI system. We obtain information from a huge number of modalities, I mean us humans, and we can compare and contrast that, and we have vision, and we have the smell, and the systems work with a limited number of modalities, which is their main constraint and flaw. They cannot absorb information from the external environment like we can, and that distinguishes them from humans. So now making them legal persons is of no point, and like it has a different means of data representation, and we will have to discuss about that matter as soon as we move closer to the human modalities in the process of AI development. Now it's kind of figment, it's sci-fi. Victor, thank you. I agree. Currently, it seems science fiction, but the time span after which we'll have to resolve that matter is elapsing dramatically, like within a generation, like 20 to 25 years. We will have to discuss that, and it's going to be a cornerstone thing, and we'll have a conflict-ridden discussion, a global one, not only between and among the business community, but much beyond. And the academia and other stakeholders should decide on the pros and cons. From my perspective, in future, after it becomes clear that we now have the powerful AI on the threshold, after all that has happened, the introduction of quasi-legal entity would be fair, and the legal and persons category was mentioned not accidentally. So it's not going to be merely a gap between the cause and effect that will result in a collapse of the law enforcement in defining where the limits of rights and liabilities lie. But anyway, the introduction of this construct will mean more security for the humankind, and that will also determine the regulation of all that for the benefit of the human business interests or for the benefit of the technological progress, because uncertainty would be detrimental to the majority of us. And there is the robotics lobby, on the other hand, that want to attract any kind of attention, that don't want to attract any kind of attention from the government and the broader public. Thank you, Andrei Kuleshov. Thank you. I think that an important feature has been mentioned from the perspective of legal entity. We're speaking about the legal persons, not a natural person. I don't see any chances of rendering the AI systems natural persons. And the situations that you mentioned, the legal entity of the AI may be needed to reflect the public interests and needs, but my personal opinion is that the use of the proxy of the legal person for the AI or something else would be just a technical thing, just for the sake of the objective function. So my opinion is no. Currently, no. So I am kind of trying to make the calculations, see the scores and calculate the scores. So far we are ending in a draw, but now I am seeing the hand of Ekaterina Potapova raised. I will kind of move the cup of the Libra to those who still believe that it is kind of too early to say, and when we talk about the use of the dumb information systems, if they work inappropriately, we cannot find who is to blame, and there are no regulations and means to rectify or correct an error on the Gosuslugi web portal. And if we add the legal identity status to the autonomous systems, that will be fraught with a possible social explosion. It is so far too early to say. Thank you, Alexander Savelyev.
I'd rather be a little bit more provoking. But I believe when the right would accept the legal standing of AI, they would accept that they failed to regulate this domain using traditional means, using traditional ways of responsibilities and rights of already existing entities. It means that AI gained so strong status, and the fact that it bears with this is the compulsory regulation in the form of code, which is quite rigid, self-executable, and instant. It means that it has become a regular law, and tried to revenge on putting the blame and responsibility on this entity. It's going to be too late, because in the end, the relations, the community relations, will be regulated not by the law anymore. Yes, indeed, this is a radical position. Andrei Ignatiev, please. There could be the following sequence of reflections. The level of autonomicity of machines, it is high, and it will be growing and reaching the level of AI. If the machine would create something great, at this stage we can be easily put the property rights to a human. It won't be hurt. If the machine would do something, the creator should be punished. That would be right. So at this stage of maturity of machines, the autonomous character of legal issues is absolutely absent, and of course it would be too early even to discuss it. On the other hand, this issue is not quite technical, but metaphysically is important, whether the human is able to create something equal to himself. Do we have any borders, any boundaries of these powers? But in general, I believe that we should deal with those promising things at the technical level, which Sergei Shuisky is dealing, the artificial psychological and mental state dealing by Mr. Karpov, social behavior of robots and machines. All those things will move ahead, will advance and develop. But the legal standing issue, I think this is too early to discuss, in my opinion. One more thing, just a few words to add. This talk can happen only when the machine be able to identify itself. And we have to understand that machine did identify itself. Before that, we won't be able, but it's far away. It is still far away from now. Thank you. Okay, Alexei. I am convinced that, of course, in AI in future will be considered with regard to some legal standing, probably not full, but limited one, but this is true. And actually, we always state that some legal entities, some entities try to avoid responsibility. Even the driver can avoid this, moving and piling all the blame to the autonomous vehicles. And the state moves to this system just to be exempt from some risks, and business tries to, in the construct of a legal entity, try to way out of the situation. These attempts to avoid responsibility sooner or later would bring about some elements of legal standing, probably not in full, but in a limited nature for sure. And the other question is, we need to understand where it is possible and where absolutely not, where it is a complete ban or taboo, and we should impose it right now. This is important, because I'm not sure, I'm really sure that it will happen sooner or later. Thanks, Alexei. Colleagues, anything else on this issue, please? Who is willing to speak? Thank you very much for your standpoints and for your comments. The opinions are quite close. Before that, we have had a debate, and I think this continuation was really exciting, and with pleasure I will give reference to this discussion if I receive questions later on the legal standings in terms of artificial intelligence. I believe that we all can see that, and the expert community stresses that what we are discussing now, and to discuss it now, today, it is obviously too early. As for the future, there are different opinions on that. At least in future, this issue is quite disputable. And I really like this standpoint. I've seen it many times, and I'm grateful to you that you added a few more interesting arguments and ideas for discussion. We're almost out of time, and I'd like to sum it up in a very short questionnaire. I have an interest to all of you, and it is related not only to discuss it from the scientific standpoint, the effect of the further development of AI and ethics, and become a little bit better to improve ourselves by discussing it with knowledgeable and skillful people. I'm sure that you can share interesting source which could be recommended to read, to look for those who are interested in this topic. Probably first thing which come to your mind, or probably something of your recent things you read or saw. Very briefly, please, indicate a book or a movie or analytical study, some material, some source which is related to the topic of ethics, of AI, that you've seen recently or long ago, but you could still recommend it on the topic of AI ethics. Or probably an aspect which was disclosed there would be also of interest for all the participants of today's discussions and the whole audience. We have very wide audience judging the statistics. Just colleagues, just a few words in a very concise format, please. Yes, colleagues, please raise hands. Valery Karpin, please. I'd like to recommend Ethics and Digit, Ekaterina Potapova. It's a very nice book. There are a lot of things explained very well by professionals for non-professionals. This is a very good book, Ethics and Digit. Ekaterina, am I right? Correct me if I'm wrong. Yes, thank you. Yeah, two volumes already. Thanks, Valery. Ekaterina, please, what is your recommendation? But not to repeat, please, dear colleagues. Well, I'm afraid it won't be new for you, what I'd like to recommend, but this book, Kai-Fu Lee, absolutely new. The Russian translation should appear shortly. In co-authorship with a writer, showing the balance between the futuristic or science fiction part and scientists' explanations. Kai-Fu Lee book, very fresh and exciting source. Thanks, colleagues. Yes, Victor, you raised your hand. The first reaction to this question is really plain. I would turn to the initial sources. We haven't invented anything new. We are all based on science fiction. All the trains in you can take Isaac Asimov, starting from the round dance, and see those models there, which have been discussed. It's a very high level, but the important thing, from time to time, we overcomplicate having any expectations without AI. Now, having very strong expectations, and just not to get lost. Let's have a look at those who were pioneers in this sphere and started to think first in this area. Alexei Savelyev, please. The first thing which comes to my mind, there are two books I was impressed by strongly. Frank Pascal, Black Box Society, this book, and H. O'Neill, Weapons of Math Destruction, about the dark side of algorithms and what's going to happen and what is already happening if requirements of ethics are not observed and basic rights are violated, which are already fixed at the legislative level. Could you repeat once again the names of the books? Frank Pascal, Black Box Society, and Weapons of Math Destruction, Katie O'Neill. Both of them can be found on Amazon. I note down to myself everything you recommend. It's not a trivial question. Grigory, let's turn to you. I would support Victor that science fiction should be new. It was science fiction earlier. Now it's a good analytics which can be used in our life. Specifically speaking, there was a serious Wild West world. It has a lot in there, but there are very fine and tiny moments about training and educating this artificial intelligence, how it is evolving. It is very exciting, you know, and from the philosophical point of view, you can find a lot there. There are a lot of questions, of course, but sometimes really interesting series. Yes, colleagues, we are short of time. Please just source and a few words. Roman? Simon Chester with Roll Roberts about the regulation and law limits as regards AI, a superbook. Andrei Ignatieff, please. Honestly, I didn't expect this question, but I have this book on my table. It's Artificial Intelligence in the World of the World from Gubinsky. It's not that advertising. I'm absolutely honest with you. You can find a lot of strategies, descriptions of countries, and a lot of material. Thank you. Interesting. I didn't heard about it. Andrei Kuleshov. Moving a little bit away from the general depth, very simple sources. Francis Haugen speech on Facebook behavior in Congress speech, and compare to a 5-year-old story of Martin Shkril, who was behaving unethically in the States and got jailed. But the society will find you and punish you all the time. Eugene, I would recommend. I do liked it. I read a book with co-authorship with philosophers. I would call Luciano Floridi, all books of him. I do like his approach and his style, explaining philosophy, technology, ethics of information, one of the books of him. I recommend Look Broader, wonderful articles, very useful reading. Thank you very much. Who else wanted to add something, please? Okay, then thank you very much. That was great. That was really exciting. I noted down, and if you allow, since we have a very broad audience, I'd like to remind you that the AI ethics story goes hand in hand with robo-ethics, and it would be good to turn to the origins. And from the robotics point of view, it's interesting to look role play from Karol Čapek of 1920s. On the first page, the author introduces the ethical law, because the book starts from the fact that the owner of robot factory comes to the office, the daughter of the owner comes to the office of her father and telling that robots are like humans, we should perceive them differently. Probably for us it is not new, but just reminded that it's 1920, and this is the first time robots appear in books. A very interesting standpoint. From the modern materials, there is no deficit in that. For the broader audience, I of course can recommend a number of researches made by a very well-known philosopher or thinker, Juvenal Harari. His books are devoted to the future of AI. And of course, very many interesting scientific books. The whole journey is devoted to that. And I'm really glad to the fact that we have had very interesting scientific discussion in the year of science and technologies. I sincerely thankful to everybody. That was overly exciting for me and interesting for me to talk. This interdisciplinary expertise is the buzzword of today, but it justifies for 100% its term. You are all carriers of unique competences, and this is very interesting. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening, have a nice day, and see you soon. Dear viewers, thank you very much for your attention.